The twin suns of Daylin beat down mercilessly upon the desert planet's barren landscape. Clarence squinted against the glare, his eyes fixed on the captured moon that hung low in the sky. Like him, it was trapped, forever bound to this unforgiving world. At 12 years old, Clarence had already experienced a lifetime's worth of hardship. The son of a miner and a mechanic, he had grown up in the harsh confines of Daylin's outposts, where survival was a daily struggle. Water was scarce, food even more so, and the constant threat of sandstorms and raiders loomed over the small human settlement like a dark cloud. But for Clarence, the hardest part was the isolation. He had few friends among the other children, both human and alien. Most of them saw him as an outsider, too quiet and introspective to fit in with their rough and tumble ways. As he walked home from the settlement's makeshift school, Clarence could feel their eyes on him. The whispers and snickers followed him like a swarm of buzzing insects, grating on his nerves. "Hey, Clarence," a voice called out. It was Zax, a burly alien boy with mottled green skin and a perpetual sneer. "Where you going, freak? Off to cry to your mommy?" Clarence gritted his teeth, trying to ignore the taunts. But Zax and his gang were relentless, their laughter echoing off the metal walls of the prefabricated buildings. "Leave me alone," Clarence muttered, quickening his pace. But it was no use. The bullies closed in, their shadows falling over him like a suffocating blanket. "Odd, look at the little baby," Zax cooed, his voice dripping with mock sympathy. "Gonna go hide in your room and play with your stupid toys." Something snapped inside Clarence. A lifetime of pent-up anger and frustration boiled over, exploding outward in a fierce cry of rage. He whirled around, his fists clenched, ready to fight back against his tormentors. But he never got the chance. Zax's fist slammed into his face, sending him sprawling to the ground. Pain exploded behind his eyes, and he tasted blood in his mouth. The bullies laughed, their voices cruel and mocking. Clarence lay there, his cheek pressed against the hot sand, tears stinging his eyes. In that moment, he made a decision. He was done with this life. Done with the bullies, done with the hardships, done with Daylin. He was going to run away, to find a new life somewhere out there among the stars. Clarence staggered to his feet, ignoring the jeers and taunts of Zax and his gang. He ran, his feet pounding against the sand, his heart racing in his chest. He didn't stop until he reached his family's small dwelling on the outskirts of the settlement. Inside, he grabbed a backpack and began to fill it with supplies. Food rations, water purification tablets, a first aid kit, all things he had learned about from questioning the local guards. They had taught him about survival in the desert, about how to find shelter and navigate by the stars. Clarence's mind raced as he packed, his hands trembling with excitement and fear. He knew that what he was doing was dangerous, that the desert was a cruel and unforgiving place. But he also knew that he couldn't stay here any longer, trapped in a life that felt like a prison. With his backpack full, Clarence took one last look around the small room that had been his home for as long as he could remember. The metal walls were bare, save for a few faded photographs of his family. His parents were out working, as they always were. They wouldn't even know he was gone until it was too late. Clarence felt a pang of guilt, but he pushed it aside. This was his chance, his one shot at freedom. He couldn't let anything stand in his way. Taking a deep breath, Clarence stepped out into the glaring sun of Daylin. The twin orbs of the white and red giants seemed to mock him, their heat beating down on his skin like a physical weight. But Clarence ignored them, his eyes fixed on the horizon. Somewhere out there, beyond the dunes and the rocky cliffs, lay his future. A future free from bullies and hardship, a future where he could be whoever he wanted to be. With a final glance at the captured moon above, Clarence set off into the desert, his heart full of hope and determination. He didn't know where he was going, but he knew that anywhere was better than here. As the settlement faded behind him, swallowed up by the shimmering heat of the desert, Clarence felt a sense of exhilaration wash over him. For the first time in his life, he was truly free. And he would never look back. The desert stretched out before Clarence, an endless expanse of sand and rock that shimmered beneath the relentless glare of Daylin's twin suns. He had been walking for 2 days now, his feet blistered and his skin burnt by the scorching heat. But despite the physical discomfort, Clarence felt a sense of exhilaration. He was free, no longer bound by the confines of the settlement and the expectations of others. Out here, in the vast emptiness of the desert, he could be whoever he wanted to be. As he walked, Clarence's mind wandered to the future. What would he do now that he had escaped Daylin? Where would he go? The possibilities seemed endless, a dizzying array of potential paths stretching out before him. Lost in thought, Clarence almost didn't hear the sound of ships approaching. But as the whine of engines grew louder, he snapped back to reality, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew that sound. It was the sound of search parties, of people looking for him. The settlement must have discovered his absence, and now they were coming to bring him back. Panic gripped Clarence, and he looked around wildly for a place to hide. The desert offered little in the way of cover, just endless dunes and rocky outcroppings. But in the distance, he spotted a line of cliffs, their jagged peaks rising up from the sand like the teeth of some giant beast. Clarence ran, his feet slipping and sliding in the loose sand. The ships were getting closer now, their shadows passing over him like great, swooping birds of prey. He could hear the crackle of radios, the barked orders of the searchers. But he didn't stop, didn't look back. He pushed himself harder, his lungs burning and his legs aching with the effort. The cliffs loomed before him, a wall of solid rock that seemed to stretch up to the very sky. As he reached the base of the cliffs, Clarence saw it. A crack in the rock, a narrow fissure that seemed to disappear into darkness. It was barely wide enough for him to fit through, but he didn't hesitate. With a final burst of speed, Clarence squeezed into the crack, the rough stone scraping against his skin. The ships were right above him now, their engines deafening in the confined space. But as he pushed deeper into the fissure, the sound began to fade. The crack widened, opening up into a series of winding tunnels that seemed to go on forever. Clarence caught his breath, his heart still racing from the close call. He reached into his backpack and pulled out a small flashlight, clicking it on with trembling fingers. The beam of light cut through the darkness, illuminating the walls of the cavern. They were smooth and curved, almost as if they had been carved by some ancient hand. Clarence followed the tunnels deeper into the cliffs, his curiosity getting the better of his fear. As he walked, he noticed something strange. The walls of the cavern were lined with metal, the dull gleam of steel and copper visible beneath the layers of dust and grime. It looked almost like the inside of a ship or a building, but that was impossible. Who would build something like this out here, in the middle of nowhere? Clarence pressed on, the tunnels twisting and turning like the guts of some great, mechanical beast. And then, up ahead, he saw it. A door set into the wall of the cavern. It was old and rusted, but still intact, the faded insignia of some long-forgotten military force emblazoned on its surface. With a trembling hand, Clarence reached out and pushed the door open. It swung inward with a creaking groan, revealing a vast chamber beyond. Clarence stepped inside, his eyes widening in disbelief. The chamber was enormous, its walls lined with banks of computer terminals and flickering screens. In the center of the room, a row of spacecraft sat in their docking bays, their hulls gleaming in the dim light. It was a military installation, long abandoned and forgotten. But to Clarence, it was something more. It was a chance, a way out of the life he had always known. With a grin spreading across his face, Clarence approached the nearest spacecraft, his heart pounding with excitement. He had found his ticket off Daylin, and he wasn't going to let it go. Clarence stood before the spacecraft, his heart racing with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. The ship was unlike anything he had ever seen before, its sleek lines and gleaming hull a testament to the advanced technology of a bygone era. He reached out and touched the cool metal, his fingers trembling slightly. This was it, his chance to escape the confines of Daylin and start a new life among the stars. But as he looked closer, Clarence realized that the ship was not in the pristine condition he had first thought. The hull was pitted and scarred, the once gleaming metal dulled by centuries of neglect. And when he climbed inside the cockpit, he found that the controls were a baffling array of buttons and switches, their labels faded and worn beyond recognition. Clarence's heart sank. He had no idea how to fly a ship like this, let alone navigate the vast expanse of space. He was just a kid from a backwater planet, with no real skills or knowledge beyond the basic lessons of survival he had learned in the settlement. For a moment, he considered giving up. Maybe it was better to go back, to face the consequences of his actions and resign himself to a life on Daylin. But then he remembered the bullies, the taunts, the suffocating sense of hopelessness that had driven him to run away in the first place. No, he couldn't go back. He wouldn't. Clarence set his jaw, a determined glint in his eye. If he couldn't fly the ship, then he would learn. He spent the next few days exploring the abandoned military base, searching for anything that might help him in his quest. He found old manuals and training videos, their pages brittle and their images flickering on ancient screens. Clarence pored over the information, his brow furrowed in concentration. The technical jargon was dense and confusing, filled with terms like hyperdrive and inertial dampeners that meant nothing to him. But slowly, through trial and error and sheer force of will, he began to make sense of it all. He practiced on the ship's simulators, his hands growing more confident on the controls with each passing day. He learned how to take off and land, how to navigate using the stars and the ship's sophisticated computer systems. It was hard work, and there were times when he wanted to give up, to admit defeat and return to the life he had known. But whenever those thoughts crept in, Clarence would think of the captured moon that hung in Daylin's sky. Like him, it was trapped, forever bound to this unforgiving world. But unlike the moon, Clarence had a chance to break free, to chart his own course through the universe. And so he kept at it, pushing himself harder and harder until the ship's controls felt like an extension of his own body. He ran through the pre-flight checklist 100 times, memorizing each step until he could recite it in his sleep. Finally, after days of preparation, Clarence felt ready. He climbed into the cockpit, his heart pounding with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. This was it, the moment of truth. He flipped switches and turned dials, the ship humming to life around him. The engines roared, the vibrations shaking the very bones of the ancient craft. Clarence gripped the controls, his knuckles white with tension. And then, with a final, triumphant cry, he lifted off. The ship rose from the hangar floor, dust and debris swirling in its wake. Clarence felt a rush of pure joy, a sense of freedom and possibility that he had never known before. As he cleared the hangar and soared out into the desert sky, Clarence couldn't help but laugh. He had done it, against all odds. He had taught himself to fly, had found a way to escape the confines of his old life and start anew. The twin suns of Daylin glinted off the ship's hull as he climbed higher and higher, the desert falling away beneath him. Clarence knew that there would be challenges ahead, dangers and obstacles that he could scarcely imagine. But in that moment, he felt invincible, ready to take on the universe and all its wonders. He had escaped from Daylin, had left behind the bullies and the hardships and the suffocating sense of hopelessness. And now, as the stars beckoned to him from the vast expanse of space, Clarence knew that anything was possible. As Clarence prepared to make the jump to hyperspace, a flicker of movement caught his eye. He turned, his heart leaping into his throat as he saw a figure emerge from the shadows of the cockpit. It was Hallie, his childhood friend and the only person on Daylin who had ever shown him kindness. She stood there, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and excitement, her hand raised in a tentative wave. Clarence's mind raced. How had she found him? Had she followed him all the way from the settlement, tracking him through the desert and the winding tunnels of the abandoned base? And more importantly, what was he going to do now? He motioned for her to join him, his heart pounding as she climbed into the co-pilot's seat. For a moment they just stared at each other, the weight of their shared history hanging heavy in the air between them. "What are you doing here?" Clarence asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Hallie looked down, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. "I couldn't let you leave without saying goodbye," she said. "And I wanted to come with you." Clarence's eyes widened in surprise. "You want to leave Daylin?" Hallie nodded, her gaze fierce and determined. "There's nothing for me here," she said. "I'm tired of the bullies, tired of the constant struggle just to survive. I want to see what's out there, to find a place where I can be free to be myself." Clarence felt a rush of emotions: joy, fear, uncertainty. He had never imagined that anyone else might share his dreams of escape, let alone someone as close to him as Hallie. But as he looked into her eyes, he saw the same longing that had driven him to run away in the first place. The same hunger for something more, for a life beyond the confines of Dalen's harsh desert. "Okay," he said, a grin spreading across his face. "Let's do it." Together they strapped themselves in, their hands shaking with a mixture of nerves and excitement. Clarence ran through the pre-flight checklist one last time, his voice steady and confident as he called out each item. And then, with a final, triumphant cry, they lifted off. The ship rose from the hangar floor, the engines roaring with the promise of freedom and adventure. As they cleared the atmosphere and soared out into the blackness of space, Clarence felt a sense of peace wash over him. He had done it, had broken free from the chains of his old life, and set out on a new path. And he wasn't alone. Beside him, Hallie gazed out at the stars, her face lit with wonder and awe. Together they would face whatever challenges lay ahead, would explore the vast expanse of the universe and all its wonders. Clarence thought back to the captured moon that had once been his only companion, the only source of comfort in a world that had seemed so bleak and hopeless. But now, as he looked out at the infinite possibilities that stretched out before him, he realized that he had never truly been trapped at all. He had always had the power to change his fate, to break free from the confines of his circumstances and chart his own course through the stars. And now, with Hallie by his side, he knew that anything was possible. As they made the jump to hyperspace, the stars blurring into streaks of light around them, Clarence felt a sense of pure, unadulterated joy. He had escaped from Dalen, had left behind the pain and the hardship of his old life. And now, as he and Hallie hurtled through the cosmos, he knew that they were truly free. Free to explore, to discover, to chase their dreams wherever they might lead. The future was theirs, a blank canvas waiting to be painted with the colors of their imagination. And as Clarence looked over at Hallie, her face glowing with the same fierce determination that burned in his own heart, he knew that there was no one he would rather have by his side. Together they would face the unknown, would brave the dangers and the challenges of the universe. And together they would find their place among the stars, a home that was truly their own. Thank you so much for watching. Please be sure to leave us a like and subscribe too. We'll see you in the next video.